During the times of the Greek gods and goddesses, there was a mystical and mysterious wonder known as the Oracle of Delphi. Her name was Pythia. She was a priestess that would answer the questions of anyone who asked, and she especially worked for the Greek god Apollo. According to dictionary.com, an oracle is the following: a priest or priestess acting as a medium through whom advice or prophecy was sought from the gods in classical antiquity. This particular oracle worked in the temple of Apollo on Mount Parnassus, about 180 kilometers from Athens. Throughout this documentary, we will see the works of the oracle, where she came from, what exactly she did, and whatever happened to her. During the times of the Greek gods, oracles were commonly known. They sat in temples and would only come out once a year, and would answer the questions of the village people. As more people heard about these oracles, the more often they would come out. The oracle I am zooming in on is Pythia, the Oracle of Delphi. Delphi was a city in the ancient Greek mythology that Apollo eventually took over. In the city of Delphi, there was a python that lay where the temple of Apollo would eventually be. Apollo was the one who slayed the python, and that would become the place of Pythia. Her name was Pythia because the python lay where she would eventually sit. The time in which Pythia came into being is still rather sketchy. The most common time in which people think she was around was the 8th century BCE. Between 580 and 570 BCE, Apollo was told to slay the python in Delphi. Another oracle told him through a Homeric hymn in which the place and time of where and when he was supposed to do this deed was given to him. The slaying of the python was the idea that Apollo was now ready to possess an oracle and a temple of his own. Before he could begin controlling the area of Delphi, two Greek goddesses controlled the area. Their names were Themis and Phoebe. The site in which they lived was sacred to Gaia and sacred to Poseidon. The Pythia was a normal average girl in the vicinity of Delphi. She was chosen from among many maidens in the vicinity. Many other oracles were from very noble families in the city in which they came from, but not Pythia. She was a clad young virgin and channeled the spirit of the gods. Being a virgin was one of the biggest characteristics of any oracle. She needed to be celibate forever, even when her duty was done. She spoke gibberish due to the way she got her prophecies. She possessed a mystical power, and she could see the future. She did not inherit any of her characteristics through a noble family, being that she did not come from one. One of the biggest things that was so mystical about Pythia was that she could tell the future. Her predictions were very vague, so a person could basically interpret them any way they wanted to, and it would come true for the most part. Pythia got her mystical powers from breathing in fumes from the cracks of the floor from the room in which she resided in. The fumes were eventually found to be ethylene gas that was in the earth. This gas would make her hallucinate and then speak gibberish from gods. Her words always needed to be interpreted by other priests in the temple or by Apollo himself. Some researchers claimed that the oracle was bitten by a snake and the venom made her hallucinate and speak gibberish to people. Either of the ideas are both logically correct. She was born to be an oracle, even though she wasn't born into the noble family. It's never said if the oracle was beautiful or ugly. Age, beauty, and family relations didn't matter to oracles or most people of their time. So what exactly did Pythia do? What was her purpose for being in the temple of Apollo? Pythia operated as a vehicle and medium to which she would express what would be Apollo's will. Anyone could ask her a question about anything, and she would briefly tell them the answer. It was also thought that she possibly got her answers from the great Apollo, but he would tell her what to say. She answered questions from when a farmer should plant his seed to when an emperor should strike war. She would only come out of the temple once a year in the very beginning times of her work. As more people came to the city of Delphi to see this mysterious woman, the more days she would come out of the temple to do her work. Apollo could go and talk to her whenever he wanted, but people had to wait for her to come out of the temple. The purpose of Apollo wanting an oracle was to welcome tribes from all mankind to come and ask her questions, and for her wisdom. The Oracle of Delphi was even known to be the one who knew that Socrates would be the wisest of the wise, even before Socrates was around. As stated earlier, the oracle either got her knowledge from the venom of a snake or the fumes of ethylene gas in the room in which she resided. She was accredited for many prophecies inspired by Apollo and was considered the most prestigious and authoritative oracle during her time. The Temple of Apollo was easily the temple with the most documentations and still is known for that today. One thing about the oracle was that she wouldn't just speak. The questions had to be asked to her by the people or by Apollo. Although the Pythia was very vague with her answers and sometimes she was very misleading, many people still believed in her and came to ask her questions. Why? This is almost the same as why do people read horoscopes today? Everyone wants more information on their future. Should they continue doing the things they're doing? Were the things they're doing making a difference in their life or in anyone else's? If not, what's the point? What's the next thing they should be doing with their lives? All of these questions were questions that the oracle would answer. She usually gave her answers in a very broad manner, or they could be interpreted in two different ways. They took more thinking later on. So even after the oracle would answer their questions, they also had to almost interpret it themselves. Many people would come to her for their questions to be answered, people in the city and people outside of the city. Being that she was so well known, people from other cities and villages would even come to ask her questions. Alexander the Great was known to come to the oracle and ask questions about taking over the world and if he should continue trying to take over the world. Pythia gave very broad answers, so people could basically interpret their future how they wanted to. Although they went to talk to Pythia and get her insight, they could almost put their own little touch on their future and turn it into whatever they wanted to. Pythia's words were always right in people's eyes because they were so vague. So now that we know all about Pythia, where did she live? Where was the temple? The Temple of Apollo is still standing today and is about 180 kilometers or 90 miles from Athens, Greece. It is and was known as where the heavens and earth met and was a very highly thought of place in the vicinity. Pythia functioned and did her work in a no-entry part of the temple. This place was thought as to be holy, kind of like the Holy of Holies in the Old Testament of the Bible. Apollo and the priests were allowed near her, and even when villagers came to ask her questions, they had to be very far away. A person seeking Pythia's knowledge could either get there by a long trek across rough terrain and mountains, or a sea voyage. The temple was tucked away on the mountainside of Mount Parnassus, outside of Athens. It was considered an insanely holy place, and still is today. Hercules and other gods would come and consult with Pythia as well. One time, during one of Hercules' visits, he tried to steal the tripod that Pythia sat on. Some thought that there was where she got all of her great knowledge from, because she never moved from it when villagers were around. This is one of the biggest myths of the oracle. The office of the oracle used to be possessed by Themis and Phoebe, and the site was sacred to Poseidon and Gaia, instead of Apollo. There are other myths of other gods owning the area of the Temple of Apollo. Apollo eventually took it over, though, and he was the last god to own it before the area became abandoned. As of now, no one believes in these oracles anymore. They aren't around to hear the prophecies, and no one talks about them. The temples in Europe are either destroyed or in ruins. Why didn't this practice continue on into today's world? When the other Western religions went over into the European countries, most of these practices died out. When all of the Greek gods died off, there was no one to run these temples and oversee the oracles, so the whole idea died out with the gods. When focusing in on Pythia, her fumes that she breathed in ran out. They all evaporated, and she no longer could function and do her job. There is a myth that Pythia was just high on drugs the whole time during these messages because of all the fumes that she breathed in. This could easily be possible because of the fumes of ethylene gas do make people hallucinate. The only logical thing that could have happened to the oracle after she didn't work anymore was that she just eventually died, being that she was a normal mortal woman. No one really knows if she lived with her family again or stayed close with the Greek gods. She was easily the most well-known and prestigious oracle of all time. She got the most visitors and was famous for the famous leaders and gods that would come to consult with her. The Temple of Apollo and the Oracle of Delphi are filled with many myths and untold stories that will probably never be told. There are many things about her that we will probably never know, but with researchers doing all they can, many new facts are popping up all the time. The Oracle of Delphi is easily one of the biggest ideas of Greek religion and Greek mythology. She was well known all over the world, although we don't know that she really did possess the mystical powers that people believe that she did, or was she really just stoned all throughout her life. She was inevitably one of the high points of the 8th century. No one knows whatever happened to her after she wasn't able to do her job anymore, but the idea and legacy of her still lives on at the Temple of Apollo.